Hi guys, welcome back to our grammar series. Right now we are working on learning the final set of grammar tenses, and today we will focus on learning the past perfect continuous, or the past perfect progressive. In our last video, we learned about the present perfect progressive, and we discussed that the perfect progressive tenses are used when we are speaking about an action that was, is, or will be in progress is completed. Keep in mind that it's better to learn the perfect tenses as well as the progressive tenses before trying to learn the perfect progressive tenses. In the past perfect continuous tense, we are discussing an action that began in the past, continued in the past, and kept going until another defined time that was also in the past. Let's look at how to form the past perfect progressive. Just like the other perfect continuous tenses, we use the past form of the verb have along with the word been and the verb's present participle. This means that we use had, been, and root ing or verb ing to form the past perfect continuous. For example, he had been playing with his cars until his toy broke. We had been eating before the doorbell rang. Martha had only been playing the piano for a month when she had her first concert. It is important to notice that there are key words that often pair with the past perfect continuous, and that can give us a clue that that's the tense we are using. Some common words that you may see or hear are when, until, for, before, and since. These words usually come before a specific time frame or another event. Notice the phrases for a month, until his toy broke, and before the doorbell rang in the example sentences. This is how we know that an action both started and ended in the past. Particularly in speech, you may also hear contractions occur between the subject and the first verb had. For example, I'd been, you'd been, he'd been, she'd been, it'd been, we'd been, and they'd been. In the last example, you can also notice that the word only was placed between the words had and been. When we make any alterations, such as adding an adverb to the had been verbing form, it usually comes between the words had and been. This also applies to the interrogative and negative versions of this sentence as well. To form the question or interrogative past perfect continuous, simply switch the subject with the verb had, leaving the rest of the sentence the same. For example, had you been eating when the doorbell rang? Or had he been playing with his cars until his toy broke? And had she really only been playing the piano for a month before her concert? To form the negative version of the past perfect continuous, we add the word not between the words had and been. For example, we had not been eating yet when the doorbell rang. Martha had not only been playing the piano for a month before her concert, and he had not been playing with his cars when his toy broke. Please note that in negative sentences, the contraction would typically be heard between the first verb had and not. I hadn't been, you hadn't been, she hadn't been, he hadn't been, it hadn't been, we hadn't been, and they hadn't been. Now that we know how to form the past perfect continuous, when to contract, and how to form negative and interrogative sentences, it's important to know and understand when to use the tense. Don't forget that the perfect continuous tenses tell us how long something happened for. The past perfect continuous tense is similar to the past perfect. However, it is designed to tell us about longer actions that happened in the past and before something else happened in the past. For example, it had already been raining for 5 hours before I went outside. In a way, You can think of the past perfect continuous being just like the present perfect continuous, but with the time frame being before instead of now. If you remember, there are always two actions in the perfect continuous tenses. If both actions happened in the past, you will always have to choose the past perfect continuous instead of the present perfect continuous. We also use the past perfect continuous when we are talking about something that was completed immediately before another time in the past, usually to show a specific result of something. This is an easy way to demonstrate cause and effect. For example, the roads were all wet because it had been raining, or she gained weight because she hadn't been exercising enough. The past perfect continuous is often used in reported speech. Reported speech is when someone is telling another person a story about a third person. Talk about confusing. Because of this, it carries the same meaning as the present perfect continuous or past continuous in direct speech. For example, if my son comes home from school and tells me, "I was playing with Jonah all day," and I was trying to tell my husband what my son had told me, I would have to change the tense to past perfect continuous when I told him he said that he had been playing with Jonah all day. You may be wondering what the difference is between past continuous and past perfect continuous. This can be a bit trickier to understand because even when both sentences are grammatically correct, it can indicate a different meaning. Remember that past continuous is used when we were talking about actions that are interrupted, and past perfect continuous is used when we are talking about a period of time that happened before something else in the past. Let's look at an example of each to help you understand the difference. The kitchen was a mess because they were baking so much food. In this sentence, we understand that the kitchen is messy because of a lot of food that was being made either at that moment or possibly had just finished being made. The kitchen was a mess because they had been baking so much food. In this sentence, the meaning slightly changes. It is still possible that they had just finished making the food. However, it is also possible that they stopped making food a while ago and they just haven't cleaned up yet, likely because of an implied tiredness. Although in some cases both tenses are correct, you want to make sure that you are using the most correct tense for the situation in order to avoid miscommunications. As always, don't forget that non-continuous verbs can't be used in any continuous tense. Any static verb needs to be used with the past perfect instead. For example, we can never say Matthew had been owning his house for a year before he moved. Instead, we would have to say Matthew had owned his house for a year before he moved. That's it. Well done learning about the past perfect continuous tense today. In order to make sure that you have understood the lesson, I recommend writing at least 10 sentences using the past perfect continuous. After you write them, go back through this video to make sure that it meets all of the criteria we have talked about. Then, make a point to use it in your next conversation with a native English speaker. For example, when using reported speech. You can even ask them if you used it correctly to make sure. Have a wonderful day and see you next time on ESL Universe.